Imagine opening a file cabinet that contains not just the story of one criminal, but pieces of power, privilege, secrecy, and unanswered questions about justice itself. This is what the world now calls the Epstein Files. For years, these materials were hidden from public view, locked in government vaults. Millions of pages documenting years of investigation into a convicted child sex offender, his associates, and the networks around him were sealed, until a law in 2025 forced a partial unveiling. Yet even today, most of that information remains obscured, and the questions it raises are as haunting as the allegations themselves. Jeffrey Epstein was much more than a wealthy financier. Born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, he came to be known for his social circle that included elite figures, politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and royalty. By the time he died in 2019, Epstein had become one of the most notorious figures in modern criminal history. Convicted child sex offender and accused trafficker whose name became synonymous with abuse, privilege, and unanswered justice. His story is not only about his crimes but about the powerful systems that allowed them to persist for so long. The term Epstein Files refers not to a single document, but to millions of pages of records held by the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, and federal prosecutors. These materials include investigative reports, court documents, emails, travel logs, photos, grand jury testimony, financial records, and communications connected to Epstein's businesses and criminal enterprise. For almost a decade after Epstein's death, most of these records were either inaccessible or partially sealed, sparking widespread speculation about their contents and the names they might contain. In November 2025, after mounting bipartisan pressure, the United States Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a rare display of overwhelming agreement across party lines. The House of Representatives voted 427-1 to pass the bill. The Senate followed by unanimous consent, and President Donald Trump signed it into law. This law required the Department of Justice to release all unclassified documents related to Epstein's cases within 30 days, with limited exceptions only to protect the identities of victims and ongoing legal matters. It was meant to bring transparency to decades of mystery and speculation. On December 19, 2025, the deadline arrived, and the Department of Justice began releasing batches of documents. The initial release included thousands of pages, some photos, police reports, and excerpts from grand jury testimony. But for many observers, what was released amounted to only a fraction of what the law required. The released documents offered glimpses into Epstein's world but failed to satisfy the public's expectations for clarity. Notices of heavy redactions immediately drew criticism, as many names and details were blanked out in thick black blocks, leaving readers with as many questions as answers. As of early 2026, reports indicate that less than 1% of the total documents held by the DOJ have been released to the public. While the initial disclosures amounted to tens of thousands of pages, the Department of Justice still holds millions more, possibly over 2 million documents, under review. According to those briefed on the matter, more than 400 attorneys and reviewers are working to redact sensitive information before additional releases. This task alone, they argue, has made compliance with the law slower and more painstaking than anticipated. Critics argue that these explanations mask a broader problem, that powerful interests and political considerations are slowing the process and that the law's intent is being undermined. The DOJ's slow pace has led lawmakers from both parties to call for independent oversight or even contempt proceedings against individuals who have refused to cooperate. Some of these disputes have centered on figures like billionaire and former political leaders resisting subpoenas. This political tug-of-war has turned what was intended to be a straightforward transparency effort into a contentious national debate. To understand why the Epstein Files matter so deeply, it helps to go back to the origins of this saga. Jeffrey Epstein's criminal history stretches back decades. In the early 2000s, local law enforcement in Palm Beach, Florida, first began compiling complaints from teenage girls who described being paid for massages and sexual acts at his estate. These were not isolated incidents but a pattern that would eventually lead to federal attention. Yet in 2008, Epstein negotiated a controversial plea deal that allowed him to plead guilty to lesser state charges and serve just 13 months in a county jail with work release privileges, a deal that angered victims and legal experts alike for its leniency. Over the next decade, Epstein's activities remained under scrutiny, and he was finally arrested again in July 2019 on federal charges of sex trafficking minors in New York and Florida. The indictment alleged that Epstein operated a network that lured underage girls to his homes, where they were sexually abused and then sent on to others. Before his trial could take place, Epstein was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell on August 10, 2019, in what authorities ruled a suicide, though his death spawned intense speculation and conspiracy theories about potential foul play and cover-ups. Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, played a central role in this dark narrative. Maxwell was arrested in 2020 and later convicted on multiple charges, including recruiting and grooming victims for Epstein. In December 2021, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her role in the trafficking operation, a verdict prosecutors hailed as justice long overdue. Maxwell's case exposed how close her relationship with Epstein was, and how deeply involved she was in facilitating his abuses. Yet even after Maxwell's convictions and incarceration, the broader questions about Epstein's connections to others remained unanswered. For years, journalists, activists, and the public speculated about who might appear in the files, and whether those names would reveal a pattern of complicity among the powerful. Some names were mentioned in prior court documents and unsealed civil litigation, including political figures, celebrities, and business leaders. But the appearance of a name in a document does not equal proof of wrongdoing, and many individuals have denied any involvement or accused critics of misleading narratives. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was designed to settle these debates by allowing public access to the full body of documentation. However, the release so far has been partial, heavily redacted, and in some cases confusing. Redactions reportedly go beyond the protection of victim identities and include entire sections of documents, sparking debate over whether the DOJ has gone too far in shielding sensitive details. In some instances, internet sleuths even found ways to bypass redactions with basic software tools, revealing hidden text that raised more concerns about how the process is being managed. Meanwhile, the political dimensions of the Epstein saga have expanded. Lawmakers from both parties have disagreed not just over the pace of release, but over how the files should be interpreted. Some have accused the Justice Department of shielding politically connected individuals, while others insist that delays are solely about protecting victims and legal integrity. Efforts to appoint independent monitors or special masters to oversee the file release have been rejected by courts due to questions about jurisdiction, leaving much of the process in the hands of the DOJ itself. In January 2026, the House Oversight Committee even voted to hold prominent former political figures in contempt for refusing to testify about their knowledge of Epstein's activities, a rare and dramatic escalation of congressional pressure. Such actions signal just how deeply the Epstein files have become enmeshed in American political conflict and public distrust. Yet beyond political theater, there is a genuine and deeply human side to this story. The victims and survivors whose voices appear in these files went through decades of abuse, legal battles, and public scrutiny. For many, the slow release of documents feels like a continuation of the wounds they suffered, re-traumatizing them by prolonging the uncertainty and obscurity surrounding their experiences. Survivor advocacy groups have been vocal about the need for faster, more complete transparency that balances legal privacy protections with the public's right to understand the scope of the crimes and who may have been involved. So what do the released files actually contain? Thus far, the documents include fragments of travel logs from Epstein's private jet, court filings from past civil and criminal actions, photos of Epstein with various individuals, and bits of grand jury testimony. In some cases, high-profile names appear, though their presence in a record alone does not prove guilt or complicity. These fragments, while tantalizing, often raise as many questions as they answer. Even the very act of releasing information has encountered odd situations. Some files that were posted briefly on official sites disappeared without explanation, leading to fears about selective disclosure or technical errors. The government's official library of Epstein responsive documents warns that the content includes descriptions of sexual assault, and thus is not appropriate for all readers, reflecting the disturbing nature of the material itself. Looking at the bigger picture, the Epstein Files controversy touches on fundamental debates about justice, power, accountability, and transparency in democratic societies. When allegations involve figures who are wealthy and influential, the justice system is tested in ways that challenge norms about equality before the law. Some argue that the Epstein saga shows how power can create layers of protection and secrecy, while others emphasize the need to protect the privacy and dignity of those who suffered. These tensions lie at the heart of ongoing public debates about the files and the future of transparency. In the end, the Epstein Files are not just documents. They are a reflection of deeper questions about how society treats victims, holds the powerful accountable, and balances the competing demands of openness and privacy. Even as millions of pages remain unreleased, the partial disclosures have already reshaped public understanding of one of the most disturbing scandals of the 21st century. As we continue to watch this story unfold, one thing remains clear: the demand for truth and justice, however slow and painful the process, is something that transcends politics, ideology, and status. The Epstein Files are not simply about one man or one case. They are about how we, as a society, confront wrongdoing, protect the vulnerable, and ensure that transparency prevails where secrecy once ruled.